Hello, everyone. It's Gemma Zoe Smith here. What I'm going to do is I am just going to wait a couple of moments just to make sure that people can see me, people can hear me. Do drop me a hello below to let me know that you're here and that you can see. If you're watching this on a recap or you're watching it not on the 14th of June at 5:30, because you're out enjoying the lovely, lovely sun, then do let me know as well that you're watching this again. So give me a hashtag replay. It's always good. And then I can see that you are here. Perfect. So I can see we've got some people coming on. I'm just going to check that people can hear me. Do let me know because I can't tell that you can hear me. So do please add that in the comments. Let me know that you're here, and let me know that that everything is good. So we should be all right. We should be there. I'm just going to check. I think I can see myself. Perfect. Oh, and someone's told me that they can hear me. That is always good. So welcome, welcome. Brilliant. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to keep it fairly short this evening, just because I've got a couple of sessions to go to myself. I've got a bit of tutoring to do this afternoon, but also because I think a lot of this technique kind of stuff is something that you might want to come back to over a couple of times and really take a bit of time in terms of coming back to. So before we start, who am I? I am one of the admins here at the 11 Plus Journey, and Saba very kindly allows me to go live from time to time in order to speak to you all about everything to do with 11 Plus. I run my own tuition agency. It's called the Education Hotel. You'll see it pop up from time to time. I've tutored myself for about 10 years now, and typically looking at top schools within the UK and school entrance. And I myself took the 11 Plus. I went to Chancellor County High School. I think when I took it, it was CSSE or CEM, can't remember. And then afterwards, I attended Oxford University. I did my undergrad in biochemistry, my master's in genetics, and then I went back to do my PGCE. So I'm a qualified teacher as well. And one of the things that I do is I run one-to-one tuition, and I also run summer courses, which we'll briefly mention today. But really, the thing we're going to focus on today is all about Year 5, 11 Plus tips and tricks. So I know lots and lots of you have been asking questions on lives and have been asking questions on the group to find out more about how you can get your child to improve. And lots and lots of people have been speaking to me as well. I'm running summer courses, which means I'm speaking to lots of people about how they're doing and how their child is doing in these last couple of months. And lots of people are saying to me, oh, they're not scoring what I want them to score. You know, maybe they're scoring 70s or they're scoring mid 60s. And I know that they need to be scoring 80%. I know that they need to be scoring 85, 90. They're not going to pass. And I really, really think that's something that as parents, we've got to be careful about, because that's something that your child starts mimicking. They say the same thing. So they'll say to you, what's the point of studying? What's the point of doing work this summer? Because I know I'm not going to pass. And I think really, if you've listened to my lives before, you'll hear me talk about this a lot. I really do believe in being your child's biggest cheerleader. It's because if they need somebody to believe in them in order to believe in themselves. So for those of you who are coming to me and saying, okay, I know that they're scoring lower, however, this is what we're going to do. Perfect, because that's something that shows it's proactive. I know that my child is maybe scoring a little bit low because they need some support with that exam technique, or they're not necessarily finishing the paper. We've got something we can work with. Instead, if you are saying to them, oh, this child in group tuition is scoring this and you're scoring this, you're scoring much lower, they take that on, and you'll hear it come back to yourself through summer and through the next couple of months. The next thing is it's not about hours studying. It is about results. So often when I work with students, I talk about results driven learning. If they have put their absolute all into something and you're doing maybe half of a paper and they've got really great results, maybe they've got full marks on it, consider, is it worth changing the boundaries? So for us, as we start going across summer and we start looking towards our summer program, we start to talk about, is it really worth kind of setting out exactly what you need to do? Or is it worth kind of just saying, oh, this needs to be achieved by today? And I think I would always warn a parent towards, I wouldn't ever say to a child, we're going to stop at this time, or we're going to stop once you've done this, and then go further than that. Because again, it tends to lead to students being able to, or students kind of looking at, okay, what's the point of doing this? Why is it that I need to do this? So when you're looking at that preparation, I know that there are a number of you have reached out to me and said that your child's preparing this September, and you really want to know how to structure summer and really how to help them. I wouldn't move the goalposts. So that's the first thing. Consider rewards. And we're at the point now where it is only a few months if you're year 5 in terms of getting them through it. So I use all rewards, because sometimes you do need a reward chart, because sometimes getting that last little bit, and it often is that last little bit, a couple of months that we've got to get through before they take those exams in September. So start reaching for the gold stars, the raffle tickets. I do a thing where a student, if they score a specific grade, or if I can tell that they're working hard, they put their all into it, they get a raffle ticket. That raffle ticket leads to prizes. So anything that you can think of that is rewarding, that is rewarding them for their effort, now is the time. Now is the time to start introducing that as we come towards summer, we come towards the end of term. Start looking at really increasing. I know a lot of people have said to me, how do I increase their focus? That's a really big one that people have said. Focus is something that we're really struggling with. Do try that reward, because that should enable them to sit down and to focus for that shorter amount of time. And also consider how much you're doing. So a child isn't likely to be able to focus for several hours without a break. You need to keep it varied. You need to keep it shorter. And I'll talk again in a couple of slides about how to keep that variety. And then the last one is now is the time for motivation. So if you haven't already been on a school tour, drive past, preferably at a time that not everybody's coming out of the school gates. Otherwise, you'll find it really busy and a bit overwhelming. But drive past maybe on a weekend and talk with them about the facilities. If your child's really into drama, yes, the 11 plus does not test drama. Yes, you're looking for an academic school, but that might not be the thing that motivates your child. It might be that they've got amazing science labs. It might be that they've got a great drama studio. It might be that they've got great art. Sometimes schools do summer fates. And again, it might be something to consider, especially if due to COVID, you've not managed to visit the schools. I know a lot of them did online. So if a school's got a summer fete, just consider going along to it, because it gives your child just that little glimpse, that little chance to see what that school's all about. And it's likely to be a positive environment if it is a summer fete or a play or something like that, because that's something that their existing school, if they're in a primary school, their existing school won't be as big or as impressive as that. So really do consider, if they're putting on a play, they're putting on something at the end of summer, have a look and see if you can go along to that. It always helps with the motivation. Okay. move to the next slide. Again, a few people have spoken to me and have said that that their child is struggling to speed up. And so, for those of you who are looking at time management, I know that some of you have reached out to me and said that, you know, how can we help with time management? My child's struggling sometimes to speed up, and sometimes things can be quite long. Firstly, if you're watching this as a year 4 parent, so your child is in year 4 at the moment, this is not information for you. If your child is in year 4, they need to be focused on the syllabus. If your child's in year 5, they need to have finished the syllabus and they really need to believe that they can do it. So they need to be proven, you need to prove to them that it is possible. Because if you keep doing mock exams over and over again and they're not finishing, each time they're not finishing, or each time they're, you know, having to really rush at the end, they're never going to believe that they can finish, and they're never going to finish. So what I would say with those students, regardless of whether it is English and actually that they're struggling with the text, or math and they're struggling with the longer kind of worded questions, don't start with fully timed papers. Instead, chunk that paper into sections and really look at what your child is doing. I talk again a lot about running through the papers and spending as long as they are doing the papers on marking the papers. And one of the things when I'm looking through a student's work, I often do it alongside them, or I record them doing it. And I'm looking at where are they spending the most time? Because if we're looking for grammar school, and I know that some of you here might be looking for independent, but if we're looking at grammar schools, you've got 1 mark per question. And that 1 mark per question, doesn't matter whether that question's at the front of the paper or at the end of the paper. So if they are spending a longer amount of time on something, are they aware of that? And often, as I said, when I run summer courses, the big thing that I focus on is knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Where is it that a child is spending longer? And why are they spending longer? Is it because they've been told to spend longer there? Is it that they're struggling to do that question? Is it that, for example, in a math question, they are very, very quick at something that is straight numeracy? So a long multiplication, but actually they're struggling to be able to speed up on word-based questions, because that understanding of the paper helps you as parents or as tutors to be able to tackle the paper in a different way. So if you know that your child needs to spend longer on understanding a multi-step worded problem, then you also know that they need to know when they get there, when they need to stop. When do they need to move on? How can they move on? They need a plan of action. Whether that plan of action is always pick D, or whether that plan of action is get rid of 2 and then guess between the 2 that are remaining, or whether that plan of action is we spend 1 minute on it and then we move on. You need to have a set plan that comes up whenever they come across that type of question. So really look at, if you're going to chunk those papers, look at where your child spends the longest amount of time. In comprehension, is it inference questions? How can you look to speed up just that bit? Just that bit. So for inference, get them to write down as they're going through the paper alongside it what the author's thinking. Author's scared. Author's, they are this, they are that, happy, sad. Put the emotions down as you go down. And that will mean that when they go back through the test, when they're going back through the paper, they've got a way that they think that author is feeling. It's a way to kind of speed up inference. If they're struggling with worded problems in math, get them underlining those key words. If it is that they're typically rushing the start of the paper, and a lot of my students do this, so first 5 questions are rushed, and they're making lots of silly mistakes, and they're not having time to go back to it because they're slowing down maybe in the middle of the paper, then you need to work on how are they going to get back round to check those first 5. So really, really look at how they take that paper. Get them to take the paper filmed or look at them and note down where they're spending longer, whether that is a thing with a whole paper or whether that is individual questions. Get a timer and stick it in front of them because they need to get used to being timed. Lots and lots of students really struggle with that timer. So they do not like seeing how far they are through a paper. They would rather just do the paper. And I know that it causes additional stress for a lot of students, but in the real thing, they're going to be timed. So as we move towards these next few months, they're going to have to be timed. And whether that is using a timer or a clock that they can see, they need to be able to know, right, I am halfway through this paper because I can see on the clock, I am not halfway through the actual paper. They should be more than halfway through that paper by the time the clock says halfway. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to check. You need to get them realizing how far through that paper they are. So looking at the clock, looking at their paper. With my students, if they are slow to complete the test, again, no matter what test is, I will ask them to mark the halfway point. And the halfway point in the paper is beyond halfway of the marks. So typically I'll say to them, if it's a math paper, split it. So if you've got 50 questions, split it, 25, add some on, 30. You want to be there when you hit halfway through the timing. That's what you're aiming for. Draw a line, write yourself halfway. That way, when you get to that point, you can look at the clock and see how long it's taken, because they need to start recognizing where they are slower and where they are quicker. So recognize those strengths and weaknesses. So as I said here, in full papers, mark those points, mark the points that they should be at, 15, 30, 45, if they are struggling with timing. I've put at the end, don't replace one problem with another, because this typically comes up in terms of trying to speed a student up. Absolutely understand the way that they're doing the paper and look at, especially for math, different ways to work things out. But what I wouldn't recommend is memorizing stuff in order to try and speed something up. So, for example, I know sometimes people ask about certain techniques for multiplication or certain techniques to speed up time questions. If your child is following the technique and they know why, and they can understand why and they can check it, great, absolutely go for it. But if they are blindly following a technique and they cannot see where they make a mistake, you have replaced not being able to do the question on time with not being able to check the question. And those still are going to end up in the wrong answers. So don't replace one problem with another by introducing a quicker technique or a different technique where they don't understand how it's working. Because what will happen is they'll do that. They'll do the technique that they've been told. They'll get an answer. They'll look down the multiple choice. They would have got an incorrect step in that method, and they won't know why their answer doesn't match any of the multiple choice. And at that point, they'll guess. So all you've done is replace the fact that they were slow with the fact that they're now getting the question wrong. So really consider, why is it that they don't get that question right, or why is it that they're spending time on that question, and is there a way that you can speed it up that they also understand, so you're not just introducing a whole load of silly mistakes or a whole load of mistakes that your child's making and they just can't tell why. So hopefully that has helped a little bit about timing, and I'm actually going through a list of questions that people have asked at the same time. So comprehension is often something that comes up in terms of taking a long time. And in terms of the way that I do it is not the same way that every child gets taught to do it. And I'm going to say right now, the way that I do it is maybe different. Does not mean that it's right. Okay, so the types of things that I say are ways that help my pupils. As I said, I've been doing this for 10 years, but of course there are alternative ways that other tutors, other parents use, and that is about what's right in terms of your child understanding. For me, in terms of speeding up comprehension, what I do is I run through an exercise with my students, and it often takes them a lot longer when they start it, but it helps them in terms of being able to answer the questions. Because what a lot of students will do is they'll read through the text, and then they'll read through the questions, and then they'll go back to the text and they'll start reading in order to do the answers. And that can take a bit of time. So what I ask my students to do is to summarize. So as I said, whether you're talking about author's mood or whether you're talking about a summary of what happens, it allows them to be able to find that part of the text a lot quicker. So in a story where maybe someone's going up a drive and they see these plants and they see these gates and they're driving up the drive and then they see this big house, I would have my students every paragraph or every couple of lines just write what's happened. So described car, writing about plants, sees house, sees gates, scary. And all they're doing is they're putting little reminders to themselves. So when they are going through the question and the question says something like, how does the give a word that shows that the author is scared, I just have to go to that part. And that part is likely to be the bit that the question is looking at. And obviously the question usually talks about lines. That helps them to be able to discover it as well. I also ask them to underline words as they go through, and that is as a prediction. So a lot of comprehensions will have a certain amount of words that they get asked about the meanings. I am asking my students to guess the questions as they're going through that comprehension. So there's a couple of things that they're doing when they get to every paragraph. One of which is, where's the literary technique? Can you find it? Do you think they're going to ask you about it? Where's the interesting words? Where are the wow words? Some of you might see I do wow words on occasion in the group, and that's what I'm talking about with my students. Where are they? What's the summary? What's happened? What's the author feeling? So when they're reading through the first time, that first read is more than just, okay, I understand what the text is getting at. Now I'm going to go back over. That first read should identify where they're going back to when they see the question. We've got the opposite. When a child rushes and makes silly mistakes. And again, I know that a number of you have spoken about looking at how do I avoid silly mistakes? How do I make sure that my child focuses? Depends on where the silly mistakes are, in honesty. So if you, and this reads back to the other point that I made, if you watch your child and you see, as I said, you don't have to watch them. You can sit in the same room, read a book, and just be aware of them. But you will notice certain things. You'll notice that they might rush the first page or so. If they rush the first page or so, and then you are also seeing silly mistakes in the first one, you know that they need to be checking that or slowing it down. You might notice that around halfway, get a lot of this. I'm going to look around the room, going to see what's happening, going to play with my pencil, going to scratch my head, I'm going to, stretch, look around. Right, that shows us that they're losing focus in the middle. We need to work on a way that they can re-engage that focus. And for my students, there's a 1 minute exercise that we do, which is about letting your brain have a break and getting back onto it. Almost we treat the test as though there's 2 tests in the same time zone. Knowing where they need to be at that halfway point also helps. If you find that they are rushing the end, and if you're sitting in the same room, you'll be able to hear it. When a student starts to rush at the end, you get a lot of and they're stressing out about it, and you get a lot of page turning and a lot of kind of just looking at the page, and they're not concentrating, they're just rushing, and that means that you'll tend to get the end bits wrong. And again, with that, it's about looking at where do they need to be? Are they using that last 10 minutes effectively? So you need to watch your child and work out what's happening. And then you need to have a process in place to be able to stop it. So if they're rushing right at the start, they need to be checking the start. That means for my students and for students that I cover in the summer courses, we do not look at answers. We check answers. There's a difference. Looking is, oh, I've written something. Oh, I've ticked a box. Actually checking is a completely different skill. Cover it up, redo it. Or I prefer do it backwards or do it in a different way. So do it to be able to understand that you've got it right. Don't just do the same thing again, because it tends to be if you do the same thing again, you'll tend to make the same mistake. But if you do it backwards, you'll probably notice the mistake, or you will maybe do it in a different way. So if that's what they're making silly mistakes kind of at the start, that's a useful way. And again, if they're just making rows of silly mistakes, it tells you they're rushing that piece. So if you're finding that there's several answers that are silly mistakes all next to each other, that tells us that they've probably spent a really long time on the first one, and then they've rushed the next couple. And they've got the first one wrong, even though they've spent all that time on it. So at that point, you need to tackle that first question, because that is causing them to slow down. So try doing it a different way. It's the first one. I like to, when we're working on rushing, I like to add every minute. So add a minute per page, and then use that time to go back. And then what you're doing is you're trying to get them to complete the paper in a shorter amount of time, so they've got that time to go back. Sense check. Sense check your answers. Instead of just, again, I've got an answer, what is that answer? Does it make sense? If somebody's asked you how much change you've got from £15 and you get £16, that is not right. That is clearly not right. Something has gone wrong. So make sure that your child is properly checking it. It sounds like they're probably not. There's what was I going to say? There was something else that I was going to say in terms of it. Oh yes. When a student goes through, again, they might use their own shorthand, but for my students, they will circle something if they don't know. But I always ask them to put something down, because if they don't put something down, they can often end up marking the wrong part of the paper, especially if it's a multiple choice and they need to put something in every box. So I say to them, circle it, put down an answer, and then go back to where the circles are. And then star if you think it was hard and it took a lot of time. Because if it took a lot of time, you might not want to go back and check that one, because that one's going to take you even longer. And 1 mark is 1 mark, no matter where it is in the paper. I like to do the first 10 questions again, because I tend to find that stops a student from making silly mistakes as well. So so all of those different things to be able to check, do it differently, to be able to look at, right, where is it that they should be checking? Is it that they're right at the start? In the middle, if you find they're losing focus, have a 1 minute, and we do a 1 minute ritual, which is to get them back, to get them refocused, and to start the paper again. Because otherwise, what you'll find is they'll stare out the window for ages, and then suddenly they'll realize they've got to get on. So instead, you say to them, right, when you come to question 40, this is what you do. This, and this. Do it, put your pen down, pick your pen up, whatever that ritual is. For us, we've got a very specific one, and then get going again. So make sure that they know what's happening when you see those pressure points. If it is that the whole paper is taking a longer time than expected, then things like underlining the keywords, making sure that that they are answering the right question, not a silly mistake on one I did recently. They asked you to put down numbers. They asked you to put down, I think it was the words of a player, and almost everyone writes down the numbers, and it's because they're not reading that question properly. So lots of little tiny bits, and those little tiny bits are important, because that's where we see an increase in terms of the marks. There we are. I've talked about getting distracted during the test. Remove everything in terms of things to get distracted by. Factor in halfway, kind of a brain break. So we do up, down, left, right, wiggle, 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 and then we keep going. And it sounds silly. It does sound silly, but it gives us a minute. That minute, we know exactly what we're doing in terms of being able to go through that ritual. And it allows the student to go, right, this is the point I'm at, and I'm refocused and I'm going to continue. Otherwise, we tend to find that it goes on for a long while. Okay. Hopefully at this point you have gone through a lot of this triangle and what do I do in what order. We should have been basically done on the foundations. We should have been through the specification, practice in terms of short assessments. You're probably in the last 3 bits. So practice papers, mock exams, and real thing. Do not worry if you have to go back down to foundations though, because there gets a point where we get to summer and suddenly some reason a student will have a bit of a brain blank and they might need to learn percentages again, or decimals, percentages, or an initial skill. Or you might find suddenly that words that they've been spelling right for a whole year, they've suddenly forgotten how to do it. And it's just a bit of overload in terms of their brain, in terms of kind of rearing up for these next 3 months. It's that they're getting a little bit anxious and that their brain's kind of overloaded. So don't worry if you have to go back to those foundations, because going back to those foundation skills and maybe coming across it in a different way, if they've always struggled with it, change the way that it's taught. There are several ways to skin a cat, several ways to do an 11 plus question, but don't be afraid if you have to go back to those foundations. I see people each year who are panicking because they say to me, oh well, you know, it was all going fine until the results went like this and then they're starting to do this. And I say to them, well, that is fairly common. And that is fairly common because what we find is that a student starts to forget certain things, or they start to panic, and you're ending up just needing to give them a bit of a refresher. As we get over summer, and I'm aware that, you know, the sun is shining, and a lot of your students will be, you know, doing things over the next couple of weeks in terms of finishing school and in terms of kind of doing that last bit of term. Do consider making revision fun over summer. Now, I know it's an important time, and it really is, in terms of pushing forward, in terms of practice, in terms of looking at everything. But you don't want to burn your child out. So start to think about fun things that you can involve. And I know that I talk about this often when it comes to this time, and also I'm talking to my tutors, I'm talking to my parents, the parents that are taking tuition with us, and I'm planning our summer courses as well. And so we're looking at, you know, how can you keep a child interested and engaged for 2 hours for us every day, and really what can you do that's going to make it a interesting but also useful time. So looking at games that they can play, looking at online stuff, looking at board games, looking at, you know, being able to spend time just on technique, not even looking at specific. You can do exam technique for a whole exam, you can do exam technique for specific questions. Get them to teach you. You might find that actually there's a different way that they do something that you haven't realized until now. So consider different changes to your routine, especially if you, over the last year, have been looking at a lot of workbook-based material. Just consider increasing the variety a little bit when you're considering what kind of order to do everything in. Some students get quite stressed. Keep here. And I know that this is something, again, that people have spoken to me about and have said, you know, my child gets get stressed because they feel like they can't do it on time. They start to panic, and then it all goes a bit wrong. So for those students, the students who are really struggling with being able to focus because they find that they are, panicking about something, you need to consider why they're panicking again. So what's the reason behind that? And what is it that's causing that? Is it a specific question? If it's a specific question, then if there's only one or two of them in the paper, miss it. Put something in the gap so that you don't lose the place, and move on. Come back to it, give it a circle, but give it a star because you know it's going to take a while, and then come back. Because there is no point reaching that question, getting stressed, and then not being able to do the rest of the paper. So that's one thing, if they're getting stressed in the middle of a paper because of a specific question. If they are getting stressed because they're not finishing on time, elongate the time by a couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes, and really look at where they're spending that extra time. Is it that they're spending it on one specific question? Is it across the board? If it's across the board, you need to sharpen up the key skills. So those foundation skills, multiplication skills, we're looking at addition for math particularly, being able to do kind of quick numeracy, being able to move a word problem into a math problem. If it's for comprehension, as I said, being able to write the summary down, or for some students, some of my students draw it because it's easier for them to understand. That's fine. Right? Don't be afraid to write it or draw it. I draw it. But that's because I'm dyslexic and I find it a lot easier to do that. And so consider why it is that they're getting stressed there. If they're stressed with the whole process, I would just say about communication and looking at really the stress that your child's putting onto you versus those around them. Are they in a school where everybody's doing the 11 plus? And if they are, then you need to be aware that that's going to be what the students are talking about. No matter how much you aren't talking about it at home, they will be talking about it, and their parents will be talking about it. And there'll probably be points where they go around other people's houses and they ask about it as well. If they're in a school where they're the only one doing it, then that stress may well come from the fact that they don't feel like they're doing the same as everybody else. And that's why I would say that comes together with motivation. And that motivation is really important about kind of driving your child forwards. And there's a bit of compromise as we go over summer. I run summer courses. Summer courses only run for 2 hours a day. That's how long that we do them for. We do 2 hours a day, and then we do half an hour to an hour's worth of homework. And the reason for that is because we don't feel like a student needs to sit there for 6 hours. In fact, we feel like it's detrimental, because if they are stuck doing this every day for the whole of their summer holidays, and they don't understand why they're doing it, and lots of other people at school aren't doing it, even if everyone at school is doing it, it's very hard for us adults to focus on that type of skill for 6 to 8 hours a day. It's not something that is useful. So consider again why maybe they're spending that long, and don't feel like you have to do an hour of this, an hour of this, an hour of this, an hour of this, because actually it's about focusing on where your child needs the support. So is it that they're really good at math, and actually the math you could just do some mental arithmetic exercises, or you want them to do a couple of pages of a paper a day, but actually they need a lot more time spent on the English, and so the English is where you're going to put your focus. Don't feel like you have to stick to this regimented 1 hour here, 1 hour here, 1 hour here. I know a lot of parents who feel like because that's what everybody else is doing, that's what they'll do. And actually it's about what works for your child. It's the reason that there isn't kind of a very there isn't a one way to pass the 11 plus. There's lots. And it's about really what works for you. As I said, we run a fairly intensive course, and that intensive course is 2 hours worth of work plus a half an hour to an hour's worth of homework, and that is fairly intensive. So if your child is stressed with the whole process, then open up that conversation as well. Consider why. Have that conversation with them about where that stress is coming from. By ignoring it, nothing's going to change. Actually, if you have that conversation with them and you talk to them about their aims, about their ambitions, about what they're planning on doing, about why they're worried about the 11 plus, then purely having that conversation shows that you're listening to them, and they'll feel like it's something that they can talk to you about. If I just have a quick look. Oh, there we are. That's all fine. That's all fine. That's all fine. Okay. Yeah. So timing.